I just had an idea. So what if so I imagine if we're trying to intertwine superhero history with regular real world history, I imagine if we're keeping things mostly domestic, mostly in the United States, I imagine superheroes would probably superheroes and vigilantes would start popping up in the 1920s during the Roaring Twenties when there was a huge crime hike because of prohibition and increased mafia activity as a result of prohibition. Um, so I think a lot of vigilantes and superheroes would rise up as a response to the increase of mafia activity. Um, Afterwards, during the Great Depression, during the 1930s, I imagine that the vigilantes superheroes would start becoming like beacons of hope for communities across the country, for um, ways that people can inspire change, inspire hope, etc. Um, Eventually, by the 1940s, by the Roosevelt administration, I imagine in an effort to try and make superheroes and vigilantes more legal, more official, the Roosevelt administration would create the JSA, the Justice Society of America, in an effort for superheroes to join the team and work for the government, essentially. And over time, the group would start out relatively independent and grow into basically just a government organization. Um, Through the 40s and 50s, we start build bolstering the Justice Society. We grow the team. It continues to get members. Um, After that, beyond the 50s, we start seeing Superman in Smallville. There's reports of a new superhero in Smallville, Kansas, called Superman, and he is different from every other superhero slash vigilante in the way that I want to make him care more about the people than the criminals. Because obviously, the vigilantes and superheroes started as a response to mafia activity. So they're not focusing on saving people, they're focusing on stopping crime. Superman is going to be different from them by showing that his mission is about saving people. It's not just about stopping crime. It's about saving people, which in effect would make him different than like every other superhero. So through the 60s, Superman's reputation would grow. He would end up moving to Metropolis, a bigger city to have as a base of operations. Um, but he would always get these like offers to join the Justice Society and always refuse. He never joins the JSA in any official capacity. Eventually, over time, through the 60s, through the 70s, the JSA starts to reform into the All-Star Squadron, which is literally just the US government organization superhero team. Like the superhero team that does what the government orders them to do and doesn't operate in their own capacity, which obviously Superman has a problem with and will not join. I want that team to be headed by Hawkman and Captain Atom because that, I think, so something that I feel like a lot of people, something that will definitely help me get a piece of catharsis out when writing the story is the fact that the way most people think Superman is, the way most people have characterized Superman in their head, at least like most people that haven't read the comics, most people that have only seen the Snyder films or just have some vague idea of what Superman is in their head, they the vision of Superman that they have in their head is more similar to Captain Atom or Hawkman than it is to Superman. So making Captain Atom or Hawkman lead the All-Star Squadron makes sense to me because they act just like how people think Superman acts, even though even though all these people are wrong. But at the same time, through the 70s and the 80s, obviously Superman's reputation is growing. Superman's becoming more popular. So a bunch of new up and coming superheroes are starting to be inspired by Superman. So the superhero landscape is starting to look a lot more like Superman and a lot less like the JSA, All-Star Squadron, the superheroes of old. So this new generation of superheroes would end up starting their own JSA separate from the government. So now you have the JSA and the All-Star Squadron, which used to be the JSA. The new JSA that isn't connected to the government would be not led by Superman at first, not even affiliated with Superman at first, because we've already addressed that Superman is kind of against joining superhero teams. But with the idea that this new hero team goes against what the government is doing. Not exactly goes against what the government is doing, but kind of exists in direct response to the All-Star Squadron, compels Superman to eventually join the team. And eventually, after joining the team, he will end up leading the team because he is the beacon of hope that basically every other superhero at this point, except for the ones on the All-Star Squadron, aspire to be. At this point, by the 80s, at this point, by like the mid to late 80s, the JSA is basically like what you would normally picture in your head. Honestly, I might even consider renaming the new version of the JSA to the Infinity Inc. just because Infinity Incorporated is mostly made up of the children of the Justice Society, so I feel like that's probably a better idea. So you now have Infinity Inc. and the All-Star Squadron, which the members of the All-Star Squadron are basically the only surviving members of what we'll view as the Golden Age. And we have firmly, like, not just moved into the Silver Age at this point, but we have, like, firmly been in the Silver Age for a little while at this point. By the time Superman moves to Metropolis, we are in the Silver Age. So that would be, like, in the early 70s, late 60s. But, by the time that the All-Star Squadron and the Infinity Inc. are starting to uh, butt heads a little bit, by that point, by the late 80s, Doomsday shows up on Earth and kind of just fucks up everything. Obviously, he blows through every other superhero on Earth like they're not even a challenge for him. Superman beats him, but dies in the process. This is the whole death of Superman thing. This is when you start getting into the idea of a bunch of other superheroes trying to replace Superman after he's gone. Heroes like Captain Atom, heroes like Hawkman, Shazam, which Shazam would end up becoming the new leader of the Infinity Inc. to kind of like round out his character arc, especially with World's Finest being Superman and Shazam. But that's not the point. At this point in and throughout the 90s, you have a bunch of different superheroes that are trying to be what Superman was, that are trying to exemplify the idea of what Superman was. So you have Reign of the Superman basically at this point. So you have Captain Atom, you have Hawkman, you have Steel, you have Cyborg Superman, all operating at the same time, all basically trying to be their own versions of Superman. And after a while, you start seeing Connor Kent, Lex's clone of Superman, escape, and he starts operating as Superboy. And he's different from all the other ones because he basically is Superman. He has Superman's DNA. So he Really don't know where to go from here, honestly. So at this point, we're in Reign of the Superman. We're in the 90s. We're in Reign of the Superman. You have a bunch of superheroes not exactly impersonating Superman, but trying to basically be Superman. And this is basically an ongoing thing. The All-Star Squadron and the JSA still both exist independently at this point. Or not the JSA, the Infinity Inc., whatever. Um, what was I saying? Okay, so yeah, you have the Supermen operating, you have the Infinity Inc., you have the All-Star Squadron. Into the 2000s is where we start getting into the modern age. And in the modern age is where you start seeing superheroes like Batman pop up. At this point, we will have already had, obviously, Superman has been dead for over a decade at this point. Wonder Woman has been operating since the 50s. I kind of want Wonder Woman to show up either after the Korean War ends or before the Vietnam War starts. I know there's a few years in between those. Um, I want Wonder Woman to show up around that point, basically at the same time as Superman. Um, so at this point, Wonder Woman has been existing for quite a while. At this point, Alan Scott Green Lantern is dead at this point, well, maybe not dead, but at least retired, not on the All-Star Squadron. Hal Jordan, Green Lantern, is like an old veteran. He doesn't really go to Earth anymore. John Stewart and not Kyle Rayner, John Stewart and Guy Gardner are both operating Green Lanterns at this point, but they are Earthbound. Guy Gardner will be on the All-Star Squadron. John Stewart will be non-team affiliated. Um, the All-Star Squadron, I guess the best way you can compare them is like the Justice Gang in the Superman movie. They're just like the corporate America superhero team. Um, I think it makes sense now, especially with Batman starting to pop up in the modern age, you're now gonna end up starting to see other heroes pop up that are gonna end up forming our Justice League. You start seeing sightings of the Aquaman, which obviously I'm gonna end up having Aquaman be like basically a Viking, but now in the modern age, he's starting to be seen by land dwellers and has his official like first outing probably by the like really late 90s, early 2000s. I'm thinking probably 1998. First official appearance, first official like this is Aquaman. There's no doubt about it. We have an Aquaman. So at this point, we have a few Green Lanterns running around. We have Wonder Woman running around. Batman just started. Um, I'm assuming Batman probably starts in like probably the same year, 1998. He's like 22, 23 at this point. A few years later, 2002, probably 2001, 2002, he gets his first Robin. So you just you have like the precursor to the the Justice League starting to come together basically. Martian Manhunter is on Earth, trapped by the government underground. Um, exists, obviously. Blue Beetle's on the Infinity Inc. at this point. Um, but yeah, we basically have our Justice League together at this point. By the time of like the mid 2000s, I want to say like maybe 2004-ish time, the arc for Reign of the Superman is starting to come to its end. Hank Henshaw, Cyborg Superman, has revealed his very selfish personal desires, his selfishness, his evilness, etc. Um, Connor Kent, Superboy, is like very popularly like the son of Superman at this point. Like he is basically between a bunch of the Supermen. Cyborg Superman has ruined his reputation at this point. Captain Atom is leading the All-Star Squadron. Shazam is leading the Infinity Inc. And Superboy is our resident. Like this is the successor to Superman. But Batman believes, excuse me, honestly, I don't even know if having Superboy there is a good idea. So delete Superboy. Just you have Shazam as the leader of the Infinity Inc. You have Captain Atom as the leader of the All-Star Squadron, and Cyborg Superman has basically just ruined his reputation at this point. I want to say just replace Superboy with Supergirl because I think having Lex's clone doesn't make as much sense as just having Supergirl's rocket land after Superman is dead. So Supergirl is basically like the de facto, like this is the replacement for Superman at this point, like widely known amongst like regular people. Um, but Batman has like this plan. Batman knows that a lot of these other Superman impersonators aren't good enough to actually be Superman. So Batman decides, like, basically on the down low to try and come up with a way to bring back Superman. And it's going to take a while. He's not going to really be super duper focused on this plan. It's kind of going to be on the back burner for a few years. He's probably going to start working on the plan in like 2001, probably after 9/11. Um, he starts working on this plan to try and bring back Superman. He discovers the Fortress of Solitude. He discovers a way to break into the Fortress of Solitude, etc. At this point, Darkseid and the other Apocalypse, I'm going to say Darkseid is sending Apocalyptian informants to Earth, and Batman obviously is finding out about it. So he knows that there is an alien race preparing to invade Earth. So his response is, all right, so I need to get a bunch of these uber powerful metahumans together so that we can stop this thing because the Infinity Inc. is not going to be good enough to stop this invasion, and the All-Star Squadron is not going to do anything at all because the government isn't going to tell them to do anything, so they won't do anything. So Batman is going to look for Aquaman, look for probably John Stewart out of the Green Lanterns. Um, I also like Jessica Cruz, so probably either John Stewart or Jessica Cruz as our Justice League Green Lantern. He's going to be looking for Wonder Woman, who is non-team affiliated at this point, operating in Eastern Europe and the Middle East, basically just in that zone. Um, my idea of Wonder Woman is basically like the first few seconds of New Frontier, where she's defending this tribe of women, of Vietnamese women. Um, that's basically how I would imagine Wonder Woman is. Wonder Woman is like a super duper freedom fighter. So she's in the Middle East dealing with a bunch of the conflicts going on at that point. Um, Batman is like basically scouring the globe looking for the Justice League. At this point, by the time that he finally has all the pieces together to bring Superman back, Darkseid is invading at this point. So the Infinity Inc. is trying to stop the invasion, failing, obviously. Um, a bunch of other non-team affiliated superheroes are trying to defend their cities, defend their places. Obviously, the government is uh not really doing anything because that's what the government does. Um, the All-Star Squadron, the members of the All-Star Squadron are helping, but against government orders. So Batman was wrong, but Batman doesn't have to be right about everything. But Batman, with the team that he's gotten together at this point, Jessica Cruz, Wonder Woman, uh, probably Jessica Cruz and John Stewart, honestly. You can have two Green Lanterns on the same team, I don't care. Include Blue Beetle, obviously. Include Aquaman. Um, at this point, they've broken Martian Manhunter out of the facility underground because I'm imagining Martian Manhunter would telepathically try and communicate with them to get him out of there the same way that he did in the Justice League cartoon and the same way that he did in the Batman and Superman comic when they freed him in the New 52. So there is reason. So at this point, you have your Justice League. At this point, basically just unnamed. You have your Batman, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, Martian Manhunter, Aquaman, Blue Beetle. They are on their way to the Fortress of Solitude. They've stolen Superman's body. They are going to resurrect Superman and is basically, oh, and the Flash. I don't know how I forgot about the Flash, but the Flash is there too. Um, They're basically recreating the scene from the Justice League movie where they're bringing Superman back to life, and uh, when they do, the team joins the rest of the superheroes in trying to stop Darkseid, and then Superman obviously pops out, beats Darkseid, becomes the savior of the planet. The apocalypse people flee the planet. They stop their invasion, they flee, they escape. Superman reinstalls himself as the uh as basically like the premier superhero. Superman joins the Justice League. Um and at this point it's like the late 2000s, 2010s, or late 2000s, early 2010s. You have the All-Star Squadron, you have the Infinity Inc., you have the Justice League, and you have other like non-team affiliated superheroes. Um, and I know this was kind of like rambling and incoherent, but I feel like I have the puzzle of the universe. I just need to put the puzzle together. I just realized there's a bit of a hiccup in my story. If Superman is in his early 20s and becomes Superman in the late 50s, early 60s, I'm assuming he probably like officially reveals himself as Superman in like 1958-ish time. If he's doing that, how the fuck am I supposed to dilate the time between Superman's rocket landing on Earth and Supergirl's rocket landing on Earth if Krypton blows up at the same time, no matter what? I can't just make it be Supergirl from a different universe. That's lazy. That's a cop out. But so is like basically any other definition, any other explanation. So what the fuck am I supposed to do? I thought about having it so that Supergirl gets stranded in the Phantom Zone after her rocket gets fired, so that even though Superman's rocket lands in Kansas in the 20s, um, Supergirl's rock or in the 30s, because if he's in his 20s by the late 50s, then he would be born in the 30s. So if his rocket lands in Kansas in the 30s, that means Supergirl's rocket has to land in the late 80s, early 90s after he's dead. So you have to have like a nearly 40-year time displacement between Superman landing on Earth and Supergirl landing on Earth, never minding the fact that Superman landed as a baby and Supergirl landed as a teenager.